Hell is other people. Sartre's darkest quote explained, "Let me ask you something personal, maybe even disturbing. Have you ever felt completely exposed just by being in someone's presence? Not because they said anything, not because they judged you out loud, but because their very gaze, their attention, just the fact that they see you makes you feel like you're being watched by something more than eyes." That is the strange, haunting feeling Jean-Paul Sartre was trying to capture when he wrote, "Hell is other people." But here's the twist most people don't understand. Sartre didn't mean that other people are terrible, or that we should avoid them. He wasn't whining about how annoying humans are. He was saying something far more terrifying and more intimate. When Sartre wrote this line in his 1944 play No Exit, it was meant as a punch to the soul. Three characters are locked together in a room for eternity. There are no torturers, no chains, no flames, just each other. And that's the torture. Why? Because there's nowhere to hide. You can't retreat into yourself when someone else is always there to reflect you back to yourself. You become a performance, a prisoner of perception. The moment someone else sees you, you are no longer your own. You become the version of yourself that lives in their mind. And here's the kicker, you can never reach into that mind and change the version they've crafted. Think about how often we behave differently when we know we're being watched. You smile when you're sad. You act confident when you're crumbling. You pretend to care when you're dying to leave. This is not just social behavior, it's existential theater. You're curating your identity. You're trying to control the narrative. But the other person, they're doing the same. And here's where it gets dark. No matter how hard you try, you can never fully control how another person sees you. You feel trapped in a version of yourself that you didn't write. And that is why Sartre calls it hell. Now pause. Really pause. What version of yourself lives in the people around you? Your friends, your parents, your enemies, your exes? Or are those versions you? Or are they distorted mirrors, cracked and foggy, but locked in place? Can you live with the fact that you are not, and can never be, just yourself? That you are always, to some degree, a reflection? I'm not asking this to make you paranoid. I'm asking because this is the essence of what it means to live with consciousness, to be a human in a world full of other humans, each with their own gaze, their own judgments, their own silent verdicts.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But here's where it gets even deeper. Sartre believed that freedom, the radical, terrifying freedom to define ourselves, comes with a cost. You are free to choose who you are, but others are also free to define you in ways you can't control. And the more you insist on being seen or understood, the more you become dependent on their gaze. You become a hostage to their approval or their misunderstanding. It's like trying to paint yourself, but the canvas is in someone else's hands. You can scream, "That's not me," but it doesn't matter. They've already framed you. Let me ask you something even harder. If no one knew you existed, who would you be? If there were no eyes to watch you, no ears to hear you, no minds to remember you, would you still be you? Or are you, in some inescapable way, always shaped by the presence of others? We think of identity as internal, but Sartre forces us to confront a brutal truth. Our identity is always in tension with the external. We are never just who we think we are. We are also who others see us as, and these two versions can never fully align. This is not just philosophy, this is your life. Every awkward moment, Every miscommunication, every time you've been misunderstood, every time you've had to explain yourself, defend yourself, perform yourself, these are all rehearsals in the theater of the other. And the worst part? Most of us don't even know we're acting. We think we're authentic, but we're not. We're curated, filtered, framed. The self is a kind of mask, and the more people around you, the more masks you wear. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't about blaming others. Sartre wasn't saying people are evil. He was saying people are inescapable. Even when you're alone, you carry the imagined gaze of others with you. You hear your mother's voice in your head. You feel your ex's judgment. You anticipate what your boss would say. You internalize the other. That's why solitude is never pure. The room may be empty, but your mind is full of ghosts. So what can we do? How do we live with this existential surveillance? How do we navigate a world where we're always being seen, always being defined from the outside in? Here's where Sartre leaves us hanging. He doesn't give us comfort. He gives us a challenge. Own your freedom, he says. Accept that you'll be misunderstood. Stop trying to control the narrative in everyone's head. You can't. The only real freedom is the freedom to be misunderstood and still choose who you are. So I'll leave you with this question. Would you rather be loved for a version of yourself that isn't true, or be misjudged for the truth of who you are? That's Sartre's wager. That's the cost of authenticity. That's the hell and the freedom of being seen, the mirror of the other. Why you can never truly be alone. Let's descend even deeper, because we're not done yet. We've talked about how the mere presence of others creates a mirror we can't escape, how their gaze traps us in a version of ourselves we didn't choose. But what happens over time when you start to believe in that version? When the expectations, the labels, the judgments of others slowly carve themselves into your psyche until you no longer know where you end and they begin. This is the true prison of perception, not merely being seen, but being reshaped by what others think you are. It starts subtly. Maybe someone calls you shy, or arrogant, or too intense. Maybe it's a teacher, a parent, a partner, a stranger online. At first, you resist. You think, that's not me. But the words linger. You catch yourself behaving in ways that match the label, or trying desperately to prove it wrong. Either way, the label now has power. You revolve around it. And slowly, like water wearing down stone, the perception becomes part of you. Not because it's true, but because it's repeated. And here's the terrifying part. Repetition often feels like truth. This is what Sartre meant by the look, the gaze that defines. Once someone sees you in a certain way, that version begins to live, independent of your control. The more people who share that version, the stronger it becomes. Until one day you wake up and realize the self you've been living isn't really yours. It's a response, a reaction, a defense. A costume stitched together from other people's opinions. You've become a character in a story they wrote, but you're the one acting it out. Now think about how this plays out in modern life, especially online. Social media amplifies the gaze of others to an unbearable degree. You're not just being seen, you're being scored. Likes, comments, shares. Every post is a performance. Every reply is a judgment. And the worst part, you start to curate yourself to match the metrics. You post what gets approval. You say what fits the narrative. You live in a state of constant self-consciousness. And over time, the curated self becomes the only self you know. You've been seen so many times, in so many ways, that you've forgotten how to be unseen. So here's the question that should haunt us. What parts of me are real, and what parts are reactions? What thoughts are truly mine, and which ones were implanted by other people's expectations? It's a brutal inquiry. It forces you to peel back layers you didn't even know you had. To confront the possibility that your personality, your habits, your goals, even your dreams might have been shaped more by others than by your own will. That your so-called authentic self might be just another mask, one you've worn so long it fused to your skin. But Sartre doesn't stop there. He warns us that the danger goes both ways. But just as we become prisoners of how others see us, we also become wardens trapping others in our own perceptions of them. We reduce people to roles: the villain, the hero, the ex, the failure, the one who hurt me. We freeze them in time. We strip them of the right to change. And in doing so, we unknowingly create the very hell we're trying to escape. We turn relationships into prisons, dialogues into judgments, people into props in our own identity theater. And yet, we do this because it feels safer. Labels give us certainty. Identity gives us control. But that control is an illusion, because the more we define people, the more we lose the ability to truly see them. And the more we try to control how we're seen, the further we drift from ourselves. It's a paradox. We seek connection, but we end up constructing cages. We want to be known, but we perform instead. We crave authenticity, but we fear being rejected for who we really are, so we present versions of ourselves that are acceptable, not true. Now ask yourself something radical. Who would I be if no one had ever told me who I was? Strip away the praise, the criticism, the projections, the stories. What remains? Is there a core self beneath all that, or are we always in flux, always becoming, always being reshaped by the eyes that watch us? This is not a question with an easy answer, but it is the beginning of freedom. Because the moment you realize how deeply perception shapes identity, you can begin to reclaim your agency. You can start to choose which mirrors to believe in and which ones to shatter. You can stop playing the roles others have assigned you and begin writing your own script. But first, you must confront the truth. You have been shaped. You have been seen. And sometimes you have become the gaze that shaped others too. The liberation of being misunderstood, how to escape the hell of the gaze. Let's break free, truly free, because there is a path out of this existential trap. We've explored the prison Sartre describes, a world where you are permanently exposed to the gaze of others, where your identity becomes a negotiation between your inner self and the expectations circling around you. But what if I told you that the key to freedom doesn't lie in being perfectly understood or universally accepted? What if the real liberation comes from embracing the fact that you will be misunderstood and choosing to live authentically anyway? This is the paradox of human existence. We want to be seen, but we don't want to be defined. We crave recognition, but we fear misrepresentation. And so we perform, hoping that if we act just right, people will see us as we want to be seen. But this is the root of our suffering. Because no matter how carefully we curate our image, people will still interpret us through their own filters, their own wounds, their own stories. Their perception of us will always be a distortion, always incomplete, always in some way wrong. So what do we do with that? Do we keep performing? Keep pleasing? Keep adjusting ourselves to fit into molds we didn't design? Sartre says no. He doesn't offer comfort, he offers radical freedom. And with that freedom comes a terrifying truth. You are responsible for yourself, not for how others see you, not for how they feel about you, not for the stories they tell about you behind closed doors. You are not responsible for their gaze. You are only responsible for your being. This is the most courageous act of all, to stand in your truth, knowing it will be misunderstood. To speak your real voice, knowing it might be misheard. To live your values, knowing they will be questioned, mocked, rejected. Because here's the twist. The moment you stop trying to control how others see you, you start to reclaim your power. You begin to live not as a reflection, but as a source. Not as an echo, but as a voice. You start to exist on your own terms, even if those terms are invisible to others. But this doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean rejecting others entirely. It means transforming the way we relate. Instead of seeking validation, we seek connection. Instead of molding ourselves to fit into someone else's perception, we offer who we are and let the chips fall where they may. We stop fearing misunderstanding and start embracing it as inevitable. Because misunderstanding is not failure. It's proof that you are no longer performing. That you are no longer packaging yourself for mass consumption. That you are finally living with integrity. Ask yourself this: what would I do, say, create, or become if I wasn't afraid of being misunderstood? What would my life look like if I stopped chasing approval and started acting from conviction? Who would I be if I no longer needed to explain myself to everyone? These questions are not just intellectual exercises. They are doorways to a different kind of existence, a freer, more grounded, more authentic life. And here's the beautiful irony: when you stop trying to be understood, you often create deeper understanding. When you show up vulnerably, without the mask, people start to trust you more. Not because you fit their expectations, but because you radiate something rare, realness. And that realness becomes a lighthouse. It doesn't attract everyone, but it attracts the right ones, the people who don't need you to fit into their stories, who are willing to meet you where you are. So, maybe Sartre was right. Maybe hell is other people when our identity depends on them. But maybe heaven is also other people when we no longer need them to define us. When we can love without possessing, relate without performing, and be seen without being owned. When we can walk through the gaze of others without bending under its weight. This is the liberation of being misunderstood. But it is not a retreat. It's a declaration, a refusal to be reduced, a choice to live fully, even if others never fully get it. And in that choice, we transcend the hell Sartre warned us about. We don't escape the gaze, but we stop fearing it. We stop living for it. And maybe, just maybe, we begin to see others not as mirrors, but as fellow travelers, each struggling, like us, to find something real in a hall of reflections. So the final question is not whether others will see you clearly. They won't. The real question is, will you see yourself clearly, even when they don't? That is your freedom. That is your responsibility. That is your escape from hell. Heaven is also other people, finding freedom in the shared struggle. So now we arrive at the heart of it all. We've passed through the fire of Sartre's most unsettling idea that hell is not some place beneath us, but within us, created by the presence of others. We've explored the prison of the gaze, the distortion of identity through perception, and the existential weight of being defined by a world that doesn't really know us. But here's something Sartre knew. even if he didn't say it outright. The same gaze that torments us can also liberate us if we change our relationship to it. Let's not forget, we are not just subjects of the gaze, we are also the ones who look. We are the ones who judge. We are the ones who misunderstand, mislabel, and reduce others to simplified versions of themselves. We contribute to the very hell we fear. And that's where the path forward begins, not just in claiming our own freedom from others' perceptions, but in granting that same freedom to others. And to stop boxing people into roles, to stop expecting them to be consistent characters in the stories we've written for them, and to let them be complicated, evolving, messy, and contradictory, just like us. This is where the transformation happens. Because once we let go of the need to be fully understood, we can also let go of the need to fully understand others. We can meet each other in the space between definitions, in the mystery, in the movement, in the becoming. This is what real love, real friendship, and real connection demand from us, the willingness to see someone without reducing them, and to allow ourselves to be seen in the same light. And perhaps that's the real message of hell, is other people. It's not a condemnation of human connection, it's a warning about what happens when connection becomes control, when love becomes possession, when seeing becomes judging, when understanding becomes a cage. Sartre was showing us the worst-case scenario of human relationships, a world where no one is allowed to change, where every gaze is a verdict, where every identity is frozen in time. But we don't have to live there. We can choose to create a different kind of space between us, one where misunderstanding is not feared, but accepted, where performance is dropped and presence is enough, where we no longer need to be perfectly seen because we know who we are, and where we no longer need to perfectly see others because we respect their right to be more than we can grasp. So maybe hell is other people, but so is heaven. The same eyes that judge can also recognize. The same voices that criticize can also affirm. The same presence that exposes can also witness without distortion, without projection, without the need to possess. And that is where the deepest beauty of human existence lies, not in being seen perfectly, but in being seen honestly, even if only for a fleeting moment. Let me leave you with one final question. Not a riddle, not a paradox, just this: can you live in such a way that you no longer need to be understood, but are still willing to offer your truth anyway? Can you show up fully, knowing you'll be misread, misjudged, misremembered, and still give your love, your voice, your art, your presence to the world? That is the task. That is the freedom. That is the way out of Sartre's hell. Not through escape, but through transformation, through the courage to be misunderstood and still be real, and through the grace to let others be themselves even when they don't make sense to you. Because in the end, we are all mirrors, yes, but we are also windows. And if we look through each other, not at each other, we might just find a light that no gaze can distort. A light that reveals, not imprisons, or a light that sets us free. And that, perhaps, is the only kind of gaze worth living under.